It started with a little boy standing in front of the HOA office, clutching his dog's leash and trembling as he begged them to punish him. No one understood what could drive a child to ask for something like that, especially over a dog that had never caused harm. Neighbors whispered, board members exchanged confused glances, and within hours, the entire community was buzzing with rumors. Some said it was guilt. Others thought it was revenge. But the truth was something no one saw coming, a truth that would expose the heartless side of a neighborhood obsessed with control, and remind everyone just how cruel rules can become when compassion disappears. The neighborhood of Willow Creek looked perfect from the outside, neatly trimmed lawns, pastel-painted houses, and an HOA board that promised harmony and order. It was the kind of place where every mailbox matched and every hedge was measured. Families moved there believing it was a safe haven, a quiet corner of suburbia where everyone looked out for one another. At least, that's what they thought. Among those families was the Bennetts, a hard-working couple, and their 8-year-old son. Eli. They'd bought their modest home after years of saving, drawn in by the peaceful streets and friendly smiles. Eli loved everything about the neighborhood: the cul-de-sac where he could ride his bike, the old oak tree where he'd sit with his dog, Max, and the neighbors who waved as they passed. To him, Willow Creek was perfect. Max was more than just a pet. He was Eli's best friend. The golden retriever followed him everywhere. Morning walks before school, long afternoons playing fetch, and quiet evenings curled up on the porch. For Eli, Max wasn't just family. He was comfort, security, and joy, all rolled into one furry bundle of energy. To the Bennetts, their home felt full of warmth and laughter, the kind of happiness that money couldn't buy. But in Willow Creek, perfection came at a price. Behind the friendly facades and smiling neighbors were rules, dozens of them. Rules about fence height, paint color, trash bins, and yes, even pets. The HOA prided itself on maintaining the community standard. But over time, those standards had turned into weapons for those who craved power more than peace. The Bennetts had heard the stories, homeowners being fined for a garden gnome, a single weed, or leaving their trash cans out an hour too long. Still, they believed that as long as they followed the rules, they had nothing to fear. After all, they kept their yard tidy, paid their dues on time, and tried to stay friendly with everyone. What they didn't know was that all it would take was one small misunderstanding, one moment of innocence, to put them in the crosshairs of the HOA. It started subtly. A new HOA president had recently taken over a woman named Karen Doyle, known for her sharp smile and sharper eyes. She saw everything, noted every violation, and made it her mission to restore order to the community. To her, rules weren't guidelines. They were gospel. And when she noticed Max wandering across a property line one morning, sniffing a patch of grass that technically wasn't the Bennetts, she made a mental note. To most people, it would have been nothing, a harmless dog being a dog. But to Karen, it was a breach of decorum, a sign of disregard for the rules everyone agreed to follow. Soon after, a letter appeared in the Bennetts' mailbox. It wasn't aggressive, just official, a friendly reminder that all pets must remain on their owner's property at all times. The Bennetts thought little of it and reminded Eli to be careful. But what none of them realized was that this was only the beginning. That one letter marked the quiet start of something much darker, a slow unraveling of peace. A battle between decency and authority that would drag the whole neighborhood into emotional chaos. Because in Willow Creek, it wasn't the broken fences or uncut lawns that caused conflict. It was pride. It was control. And when those collided with a child's innocent love for his dog, the consequences would shake the community to its core. The first letter had seemed harmless enough. Just a printed reminder with polite wording and the HOA's logo stamped at the top. But a week later, a second one arrived. This time, the tone had changed. Repeated violation, Pet observed off-property. Future infractions may incur fines. It was signed by Karen Doyle herself in her usual, neat signature, the kind that tried to look friendly but carried a warning beneath it. Eli's parents didn't think much of it at first. Max was always leashed when outside, and Eli was careful. But a few days later, another letter came, then another. The HOA claimed that Max had been seen roaming freely and disturbing the peace. They included timestamps, all suspiciously precise, and blurry photos of what looked like a golden dog. Only one problem. Those timestamps matched the hours when Max was inside the house, sleeping by Eli's bed. Something was wrong. The Bennetts began to suspect that this wasn't about Max at all. It was about control, about power. And as the letters turned into fines, they realized Karen Doyle was just getting started. At first, the fines were small, $50 for noncompliance, then $100 for a repeated infraction. But with each payment notice came new accusations. Max's barking was excessive. His leash was too long. The Bennett's grass near the mailbox was discolored due to pet urine. It didn't matter that none of it was true. The HOA had photos, taken from a distance, with no clear proof. Neighbors began to whisper. Some avoided the Bennetts altogether, afraid to be seen taking sides. Others secretly sympathized, but no one wanted to challenge Karen. After all, she'd fine people for hanging wind chimes, leaving bikes visible in driveways, even for having mismatched curtains facing the street. Eli didn't understand why people were suddenly avoiding him or why his parents were so tense. He just knew Max wasn't allowed to play outside anymore. And for an 8-year-old boy, that was heartbreaking. Still, the Bennetts tried to comply. They built a higher fence, installed a camera, even 13 in total, and recommended a $1,000 fine and possible revocation of pet privileges. Revocation of pet privileges. It sounded absurd, but in HOA language, it meant they could legally demand that Max be removed from the property. Mr. Bennett argued calmly, presenting videos showing Max inside during the alleged times. But Karen dismissed them, claiming the footage could be edited. Another board member suggested that perhaps Eli had been irresponsible. Eli sat quietly in the back, clutching Max's leash, his eyes wide. He didn't understand why the adults were lying or why they seemed so cold. When the Bennetts left that meeting, their reputation was shattered. Word spread quickly. In Willow Creek, gossip traveled faster than truth. The next week, something unthinkable happened. One morning, Mrs. Bennett found Max's leash hanging on their fence, snapped, frayed, as if someone had cut it. Max was gone. Eli's screams echoed through the cul-de-sac as neighbors peeked through curtains. For hours, they searched. The family drove through every nearby street, calling his name. Finally, late that evening, they found him sitting near the edge of the community pond, wet, shivering, and frightened, but unharmed. When they brought him home, a new letter was waiting in the mailbox. Final warning. Continued violations will result in pet removal by community enforcement. It was the first time Mrs. Bennett cried openly in front of Eli. They began keeping Max inside permanently, except for short, supervised walks. But the HOA wasn't finished. Karen had started circulating a notice to all residents. Reminder, pets creating disturbances may be subject to removal. Underneath, she added a note urging residents to report all violations immediately. Soon, Eli noticed neighbors filming him whenever he stepped outside with Max. Some even shouted that he was breaking the rules. He didn't understand why they hated him or why everyone seemed afraid to speak up. Then came the breaking point. One afternoon, while Eli was walking Max on a short leash near the edge of their yard, Karen appeared, camera in hand. She started taking pictures, muttering about unauthorized pet activity. Eli froze. Max sat quietly beside him, tail wagging gently. Karen stormed closer, pointing toward the property line and saying something about another violation. That's when Eli, frightened and desperate, blurted out words that would soon echo through the entire neighborhood. "Please don't take him away. Please punish me instead." A neighbor overheard. Another recorded it. Within hours, the clip was on social media, a small boy begging the HOA president not to take his dog. It went viral within the community, spreading like wildfire through group chats and message boards. People who had stayed silent finally began to question what was happening. They saw the fear in Eli's voice, the cruelty behind the rules. But the HOA doubled down. They issued a statement claiming misinformation and emotional manipulation, insisting they were acting within policy. The Bennetts were humiliated. They considered moving. But Eli begged them not to. He wanted to stay not because he loved the neighborhood anymore, but because he wanted to protect Max. That was when Mr. Bennett decided to fight back. He started gathering evidence, timestamps, footage, witness statements from sympathetic neighbors. He discovered that several of the violation photos used by the HOA were doctored, cropped, zoomed, or even taken from different days. In one, the dog pictured wasn't even Max. But just as he prepared to confront the board with his findings, another letter arrived. This one marked urgent. Final notice. It stated that the HOA had scheduled a vote to force the Bennetts to remove Max from the property due to ongoing noncompliance. The vote would happen in 3 days. Those final days felt endless. The Bennetts barely slept. Eli cried himself to sleep, holding Max close. But then, a break. A neighbor named Mrs. Reyes, who had once been fined for painting her mailbox the wrong shade of blue, came forward. She revealed she had security camera footage from the day one of the violation supposedly occurred. In it, you could clearly see Max inside the Bennett yard the entire time, never crossing the property line. It was undeniable proof. The Bennetts compiled everything. The footage, the timestamps, the pattern began to crumble. Still, the vote proceeded. And as it did, Eli sat quietly, holding Max's leash, eyes filled with hope and fear. The ballots were cast, one by one. The decision would either save Max or take him away forever. The result, when announced, sent shockwaves through the room. But that's the moment we'll get to next, when the HOA's authority was finally challenged. And the truth about what had really been happening in Willow Creek came to light. Because in this neighborhood, the rules were never about safety or order. They were about power. And power, when exposed, always has a price. The HOA meeting room was overflowing. Folding chairs had been pulled in from every corner, and neighbors lined the walls, whispering, watching, waiting. The air felt heavy, thick with the tension of months' worth of fear, frustration, and rumor. For the first time in years, nearly every homeowner in Willow Creek had shown up. At the front sat the board, perfectly arranged behind their table of binders and printed agendas. And in the middle, like the queen of the hive, sat Karen Doyle, her lips pursed into that same confident, knowing smile she wore whenever she felt untouchable. The Bennetts sat near the front, Eli between his parents, clutching Max's leash tightly. The golden retriever wasn't allowed inside, but Eli had insisted on bringing his collar, as if holding it would somehow protect his best friend. Karen called the meeting to order with her usual forced formality. She began reading off the agenda items, pretending to conduct business as usual. But everyone in that room knew what they were there for. Item 6. Vote on enforcement of pet policy to 125 Willow Creek Drive. The Bennett's address. Karen leaned forward and cleared her throat. We'll now move to Item 6. This is a matter of repeated non-compliance regarding pet management, specifically relating to the Bennett household. Her tone was cold, clipped, mechanical, the voice of someone who believed the rules were her shield. But tonight, that shield was about to crack. Mr. Bennett stood, holding a folder thick with papers, his hands trembling slightly, but his voice steady. "Before you vote," he said, "I'd like to share some information the board hasn't disclosed to this community." Karen frowned. "This isn't an open comment period," she interjected. But murmurs from the crowd pushed back, soft at first, then louder. "Let him speak. We deserve to hear this." Karen hesitated. For the first time, she looked uncertain. She glanced at the other board members, then forced a tight smile. "Fine. You have 2 minutes." Mr. Bennett nodded, opened his folder, and began. He laid out the timeline, every violation notice, every fine, every blurry photo the HOA had used against them. He showed proof that many of the incidents occurred when Max was indoors, verified by timestamps from home security footage. He projected the evidence onto the screen the HOA used for community announcements. The room was silent except for the hum of the projector. Then he brought up the footage from Mrs. Reyes, the neighbor's security camera. The video showed the Bennett's yard, clear as day, and Max lying peacefully under the oak tree during the exact time the HOA had claimed he was roaming freely. The gasps came instantly. Karen's face turned pale. Mr. Bennett turned toward her, his voice firm. "Can you explain, Mrs. Doyle, how your photographic evidence shows a dog out on the street at the same time another camera proves he was right here? Can you explain why your timestamps don't match the weather conditions in your photos? Or why one of those pictures, the one you used to fine us $300, isn't even our dog?" He switched slides again, this time showing a side-by-side comparison of 2 dogs. One was clearly Max, the other, slightly darker golden retriever with a different collar, taken from another yard across the street. The murmurs turned into a low rumble. Karen tried to interject. "This is out of context," but Mr. Bennett cut her off. "No, this is proof. Proof that you have targeted my family, falsified evidence, and abused your position to intimidate your neighbors." Karen's composure began to crumble. She shuffled her papers, looking for something to grab onto, some technicality to regain control. All anonymous, but all traced back to a single IP address. "The reports you received," she said, "came from one source, the HOA office computer. Which means you weren't just enforcing the rules, Karen. You were creating the complaints yourself." The room erupted. People stood, shouting over each other, "Are you serious?" She filed her own complaints. "That's fraud." Karen tried to gavel the room back into order, but her voice was drowned out. For the first time, the control she'd held over Willow Creek was slipping through her fingers. When the noise finally died down, Karen tried to recover. "You're making baseless accusations," she said sharply. "The HOA has every right to enforce community standards. You signed the covenant when you moved in. If you can't follow the rules," but she never finished the sentence. Mrs. Reyes stood from the back of the room, holding up her phone. "I have something else," she said. "This was taken 2 weeks ago." She played the video, grainy but unmistakable. Karen, parked across from the Bennett home, sitting in her car, phone camera raised, zooming in on Eli as he walked Max along the sidewalk. The crowd fell silent again. The sound of Karen's own voice carried faintly from the video. "Let's see you break the rules again, you little troublemaker." It was over. Karen's face went crimson. She stammered something about context, about monitoring for safety, but no one believed her. The spell was broken. The mask she'd worn for years, the image of the composed, selfless leader, shattered in front of everyone. A board member slid his chair back and quietly stood. "I move to postpone the vote indefinitely," he said. Another quickly seconded. But the crowd wasn't satisfied. Someone shouted, "She needs to resign." Another followed, "She's been bullying people for years." The tension boiled over as residents began standing one by one, telling their own stories. A man said she'd fined him for having a faded doormat. A woman said Karen threatened to tow her car for parking half an inch over the curb. One by one, the community that had once been silent began to speak, and in doing so, turned on the person who'd ruled them through fear. Karen tried to leave, but as she passed the Bennetts, Eli looked up at her, not with hate, but with sadness. "You could have just been kind," he said softly. That single line, innocent and honest, seemed to hang in the air long after she'd stormed out. The board quickly called an emergency session, and within the hour, Karen Doyle was suspended, pending an internal investigation. The HOA president's chair, once her symbol of authority, now sat empty. But the moment wasn't just about her downfall. It was about what that room represented, a neighborhood finally waking up from its fear, realizing that the rules that were supposed to protect them had become tools of control. As Mr. Bennett sat back down, he looked around the room at the faces that once avoided eye contact, now standing beside him. The isolation that had consumed their family for months was gone. For the first time, Willow Creek felt united, not by rules, but by shared outrage, and maybe by compassion. Eli leaned against his father, clutching Max's leash tighter. He whispered, "Does this mean Max can stay?" Mr. Bennett smiled faintly. "Yes, buddy," he said quietly. "He's home." But just as relief began to wash over the room, one of the board members cleared his throat. "We'll still need to follow proper legal procedures," he said carefully. "There are protocols for removing a board member and revising enforcement decisions." The murmurs returned. People weren't ready to celebrate yet, not while the system that had allowed the abuse still stood. Mr. Bennett nodded. "Then let's do it right," he said. "Not like her, but fairly. Let's change this place." As the meeting adjourned, Karen's car sped out of the parking lot, taillights fading into the dark. Neighbors poured into the chilly night air, buzzing with disbelief and something else, hope. The Bennetts walked home quietly. Eli held Max close when they reached their porch, sitting under the same oak tree where everything had started. The dog's tail thumped softly against the wooden steps. For the first time in months, there was silence. No whispers, no threats, no fear. Just the sound of wind in the trees and the faint laughter of distant neighbors rediscovering what community actually meant. But even as peace settled over their home, the Bennetts knew it wasn't over yet. Karen's resignation might end one battle, but there were others to come. The bylaws she'd twisted still existed, and the damage she'd done had left deep cracks in Willow Creek's foundation. And somewhere out there, a woman who once controlled a neighborhood with a clipboard and a camera was plotting her next move. Because power, especially the kind built on fear, doesn't disappear quietly. And when it returns, the question isn't whether the rules will change, but whether the people finally will. In the weeks that followed that explosive HOA meeting, the once perfect streets of Willow Creek didn't feel quite the same. The silence that had long blanketed the neighborhood, that quiet fear of crossing invisible lines, was gone. People were talking again. Neighbors who used to look down at their feet now looked each other in the eye. Some apologized for staying silent. Others admitted they'd been scared too. The story of the Bennetts and their dog Max spread far beyond their cul-de-sac. Someone had posted the meeting footage online, and within days it racked up thousands of views. The HOA that tried to take a boy's dog, that's what the headlines called it. And for the first time, the Bennetts didn't feel alone. Strangers sent messages of support, offering legal advice, donations, and words of encouragement. It was as if an invisible wall had finally cracked and light was flooding through. For the Bennetts, life slowly began to return to something close to normal. But even as peace returned, the scars of what they'd endured were still fresh. Every letter that arrived in their mailbox made Mrs. Bennett flinch just a little. Every time Max barked, she checked the window out of habit. Trauma lingers quietly like that, not loud, not obvious, but they're all the same. And yet, amidst the lingering unease, something remarkable was happening. The neighborhood was changing. Within a month, the board held an emergency election to replace Karen Doyle for the first time in years. More than half the homeowners showed up to vote. Gone were the days when people shrugged off meetings as a waste of time. They had seen what could happen when no one paid attention. The new president, a retired schoolteacher named Harold Whitman, took a very different approach. His first act was to suspend all active fines until they could be reviewed by an independent committee of residents. He opened board meetings to public comment and allowed anyone to view HOA financial records. Transparency, a word that had once meant nothing in Willow Creek, suddenly became the foundation for everything. Under the new leadership, several of Karen's policies were reversed. The pet disturbance rule was rewritten, requiring verifiable evidence and witness confirmation before any violation could be issued. The HOA's enforcement power was limited, and a clause was added to ensure no board member could act as both enforcer and complainant in any case. It wasn't perfect. Bureaucracy never is. But for the first time, it was fair. The Bennetts didn't seek revenge or lawsuits. They just wanted to move forward. But the community itself, the people who'd been too afraid to speak, weren't done yet. They wanted accountability. The HOA commissioned an independent investigation into Karen Doyle's actions during her presidency. The findings were worse than anyone expected. She had filed over 70% of the community's violation reports personally, often under pseudonyms. She had authorized fines without board votes and had used HOA funds for surveillance expenses that were never properly documented. The board's lawyer confirmed that some of those actions bordered on harassment and misuse of authority. The new board voted unanimously to refer the findings to county authorities. Karen never returned to Willow Creek. Her house went up for sale, quietly, through an agent. Eli and Max went back to their daily walks. No more fearful glances, no more whispered judgments. Neighbors greeted them warmly, often stopping to pet Max or give Eli a treat for him. The dog, who had once symbolized rule-breaking, now symbolized resilience. Mr. Bennett started volunteering on the new HOA board, not out of revenge, but out of responsibility. He knew what could happen when people in power went unchecked, and he didn't want anyone else to experience that helplessness. He became the voice of reason in every meeting, often reminding others the rules exist to protect us, not to control us. Mrs. Bennett joined a local advocacy group for HOA reform. Together with other homeowners, she worked on state-level legislation that required homeowner associations to publish their enforcement policies publicly and to offer mediation before issuing fines. It wasn't glamorous work, but it mattered. And as for Eli, the boy whose tears had captured the attention of a community, he became something of a quiet hero in Willow Creek. His simple act of courage, his plea for mercy for his dog, had sparked a chain reaction that changed everything. Teachers asked him to talk about kindness during school assemblies. Neighbors told their children, "Be like Eli, stand up even when it's scary." But change, even when it's good, doesn't erase the past. There were still moments when people remembered the fear the notes left on doors, the fines that arrived like threats. They remembered how easy it had been to let someone like Karen take control simply because no one wanted to get involved. And maybe that was the real lesson. That power doesn't always look like corruption or greed. Sometimes it looks like silence. Because every community, every neighborhood, every group, every system runs the risk of forgetting that rules mean nothing without humanity behind them. Months later, the Bennetts received an envelope in the mail. For a moment, Mrs. Bennett's stomach clenched. Old reflexes die hard. But this one wasn't a notice or a fine. It was an invitation. Inside was a handwritten note from the new HOA board. "Dear Bennetts, as part of our new community initiative, we're hosting a Neighbors' Day event at the park. We'd love for Eli and Max to join us as our guests of honor and maybe, if Eli's willing to help us open the new dog park that's finally being approved. A dog park in the same community that had once tried to take a dog away. Eli's face lit up when he read the note. "They built it for Max?" he asked, eyes wide. His parents smiled. "They built it because of you." At the event, the once divided neighborhood came together, children laughing, dogs playing, neighbors talking without fear. The Bennetts watched as Eli ran across the grass, Max sprinting joyfully beside him, sunlight catching his golden fur. For the first time in what felt like forever, the air in Willow Creek was filled not with suspicion, but with life. It wasn't a perfect neighborhood anymore. The lawns weren't all trimmed evenly, and someone had painted their shutters a color not listed in the guidelines. But it was human again. And maybe that was the point all along. Years later, people still told the story of what happened in Willow Creek, how one family, one little boy, and one dog stood up to something bigger than themselves. Some told it as a cautionary tale about unchecked authority. Others saw it as proof that even in the most controlled environments, empathy could still win. But for the Bennetts, it wasn't about the headlines or the viral videos. It was about the quiet mornings that came after the ones where they could step onto their porch, coffee in hand, and know that their peace was their own again. The oak tree in their yard grew taller, its roots spreading deep. Beneath it, Eli built a small wooden sign with paint-smeared letters that read, "Rules matter, but kindness matters more." And somehow, that simple message became the motto of the new Willow Creek. The board printed it on the community newsletter. They put it on a plaque by the park entrance. It wasn't official policy, but it didn't need to be. Everyone already knew what it meant. In the end, the story of the Bennetts wasn't just about an HOA or a dog or a power-hungry neighbor. It was about something far bigger, the moment when ordinary people realize they don't have to accept unfairness just because it's written on paper. It was about the courage it takes to stand up even when you're shaking and say, "This isn't right." Because for every neighborhood ruled by fear, there's always someone willing to push back. For every Karen with a clipboard, there's an Eli holding a leash, refusing to let go of what's right. And that's the power of stories like this one, reminders that rules can keep a place tidy. But it's compassion that makes it worth living in. So the next time you hear about an HOA dispute or a petty neighborhood feud, ask yourself, when did we start valuing order more than empathy? And what might happen if, just once, we chose kindness instead? Because sometimes all it takes to change an entire community is one little boy, one loyal dog, and the courage to stand up to power no matter how small you are.